In this video we're going to talk about if statements. So if statements are the first piece of logic that we are going to include in our code, and let's talk about what it does. So an if statement is a conditional statement that performs code when found true. And how does it look like? It's really simple. We have an if keyword right here, and then we open up brackets, and then we put inside a boolean value, and when this boolean is true, then we're going to execute this piece of code that's inside these two brackets. So let's jump to our code and let's just use it so it's more easy to understand. So we delete the code that we have here before. Don't worry, you can look it back up when you want to. And I'm going to start with two numbers. Int a is 5 again and int b is 4. Now I'm going to say that if a is the same as b, b is going to be b plus 1. And we're going to print out b. So what do you think that it's going to print out? If you walk through it from top to bottom, it's going to say int a is 5, int b is 4. If a is the same as b, which is not the case, then we're going to skip this code and then we're going to print out b, which will be 4. Let's run it, and as you can see, it's 4. If I change this up and I say it's not the same and I run it, then it will execute this piece of code, which will say that b is b plus 1. So b is 4 plus 1, which will be 5. If I now run it, then you can see that it's 5. Let's say that we want to check that a is not the same as b, and at the same time we want to make sure that b is lower than a, otherwise we won't run this code. And what's going to say now? Well, a is not the same as b, and b is indeed lower than a, so it's going to say 5 again. And to show you that it's actually working, let's change it up to 2, and when we run it, it's going to say 6. So this was a really quick intro into if statements, and the next statement that we're going to use is the else statement. In this video we're going to talk about the else statement, or the if-else statement. And to do that, we're going straight back to our code, and we're going to build further on the code that we already have. So we know that this piece of code is going to be found true, and that this piece of code is going to run. Something that's intertwined with the if statement is the else statement. And let's say that we want to actually lower the b if we run this piece of code by not saying an addition but a minus, and let's run it and see if it does any difference. So let's run it, and as you can see it still says 6, so it didn't do anything. But what happens if I now delete this piece, and instead of an unequal sign I say an equal sign? So is b going to be the same as a? Well, they won't, so this is going to be false. So what it's going to do now? If we run it, you can see that the answer now is 2. And that's because when if statement is not true, then it's going to look if there's an else statement. If that's the case, then it's going to run the else statement instead of the if statement, and it's going to execute this piece of code. You can actually chain these two to each other, and you can create an else if statement. And how this works is, I'm going to say something different, and again else, I'm going to say that b is b times 2. And you might wonder, how is this going to work? Well, it's actually really easy to read, because it's going to say if e is equals to b, then b plus 2. If that's not the case, is e lower than b? If that's the case, b is b minus 2. If that's also not the case, then we're going to use b is b times 2. And let's run it and let's see what it says. It's going to say 8. Well, A is not equal to B, so it's not going to run this, it's going for the else statement. And A is not lower than B, because A is 5 and B is 4. So it's not going to also run this statement, and it's going to the else statement of this if statement, which is B times 2. So this was a really quick intro. You can also play around yourself. So if statements are really nice if you want to put some logic in your code and you want to do certain actions based on certain contexts. So this way you can define what it should do when A is the same as B, A is lower than B, or A is higher than B, or A is 2 times higher than B. And maybe you want to do something different in each case, which is the if statement great for. In this video we're going to take a look at the while statement, and because it's a lot similar to the if statement but only the way it executes the code is different, we're going straight to our code. So here we have our old code, and I'm going to delete this. I'm going to leave the int a and int b because most of these statements are easy to show with numbers. But instead of a is 5, I'm going to set this with 0. And how the while loop works is just as if the if statement, we define a keyword, which is in this case while, then we open up a bracket which expects some boolean, and then we open up curly braces in which we put the code that we want to execute if this boolean inside our brackets is true. So let's print hi here, and to show you how it works, or not show you how it works, I'm going just to say true. And the problem of this is that this while loop is never going to resolve. It's going to say int a is 0, int b is 4, and then it's going to check if this while is true, which is always the case, and then it's going to print hi. If I now press the run button, my browser will probably crash because of that it's going to be stuck in this while loop forever. So just to show you, I'm going to press run. And you can see it says that it run, but if I now click somewhere, it's actually broken. So to fix that, I'm going to open up another tab, open up the dev pad again and close this one. So this is not something that you want to do. Let's leave that out of here. And you always want to put in a statement which is eventually going to be false. So let's just put in 100 here, and I'm going to say if A is lower than B, then we're going to print out A, and after we print it out, we're going to increase A by 1. If I now run this code, it's going to check if A is lower than B. If that's the case, then it's going to print A, then it's going to increase A with 1, and then it's going to check again if the statement is true or not. So if we run it, we should see all the numbers from 0 to 99, I guess, because in the last case, when A is 100, then it's not lower anymore than B. So let's check if my assumptions are right. So as you can see, the last number is 99, and the first number is 0. So when do you use a while loop? I have to admit, when I work professionally as a programmer, I don't use while loops that much, because there are actually better alternatives in many cases than the while loop. And one of these alternatives is the for loop. And the for loop is a little bit different than the while loop. And what the Wikipedia is going to say is that it's a loop that needs to be executed a specific number of times. Well, what does this look like? The for loop starts with the for keyword, just like the while loop and the if statement, but instead of that it just takes a boolean. We actually need 3 values: the init, the condition and the increment. And these 3 work a little different. To show you, we're going straight to an example. This is an example of a for loop. So the init is everything that's before the first semicolon, which is int e is 0. And this init is fired off the first time that we enter the for loop. Then we have a condition, and just as the while loop, it's condition when it's going to leave the for loop. So as long as e is lower than 5, we're going to run this piece of code. Then when the code has run, we are going to say e++, which is going to increment e by 1. So then let's jump to our code and let's implement this for loop so we can see what it does. So we're going to delete this code and we're going to say for, we're going to define the init, which is going to be int e is 0. Then we're going to say that e is lower than 100. Then e++. Then we open up curly braces and we're going to print e, semicolon. So when we run this now, it's going to set e with 0, then it's going to print e to our console, then it's going to do e++, so e is going to be 1, and then it's going to check if e is lower than 100, and then we're going to print it again. So if we run this now, then we can see what it does. Well, the first value is 0, and the last value is 99. And that's because the last value, which is actually 100, this e is actually 100, then it's not going to be true anymore, and it's not going to write it out anymore. And that's why the last number is 99. What do you think happens when we print this e out after the for loop? Well, the problem is that we can't do that, and this is because of scopes. And as you can see, when I try to do this, it's going to say undefined name e scopes. And to explain what scopes are, we have to go back to our code. So as you can see, the problem with our e variable still exists. It says that it's undefined and that it can be used at this row or at this line at line 5. And that is the problem of scopes. So we have 3 scopes at the moment. We have the scopes of this whole file, so from top to bottom. If we place some enters here, this still belongs to the scope, so this is 1. Then we have 2, which is this void main method. And then we have 3, which is this actual for loop. And scopes always work from the outside in, but never from the inside out. So what this means is, if I declare a variable, something 0, and I set it here with e, that's fine. It's going to work, there's no problem. But if I take this outside here, then this isn't going to work. Also, if I try it here, so outside here, it's also not going to work. But let's say that I'm going to delete this and I'm going to set it here, and I'm going to put this for something right here. It's still going to work because it's now in our outer scope. So this is the biggest scope at the moment. We have now declared something in our global scope, it's called. And we can use it now in this method, we can use it in this for loop if we declared another method. So let's say that we declared another void main2 method. That's also going to be fine and we can still use it. And as you can see, we have still here the same problem, but these 2 methods are both referencing this same something variable. And maybe this is something that you not want to do, but that I'm going to explain in the next video. We're actually going to start build an application with some logic, and we're going to play around with these concepts that we just learned, and we're also going to learn some new concepts. But then you can see how it works in certain contexts.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.